Welcome to the PBIS Fundamentals Learning Series module, Fidelity, Data, and Evaluation, TFI Features 114 and 115. We always begin any learning with a shared understanding of what positive behavioral interventions and supports is in Virginia Beach, PBIS. Anchored to Goal 2 within our strategic framework, PBIS focuses on the goal of student well-being. PBIS is a data-informed decision-making framework for establishing the social culture and behavioral and academic supports needed for a school to be an effective learning environment for all students. Every goal within the strategic framework has an embedded equity emphasis. Within Goal 2, we are focused on engaging in culturally responsive practices division-wide. We identify and address inequities in discipline practices by investigating and implementing best practices, as well as seeking innovative solutions. Through PBIS, Virginia Beach City Public Schools has a desire to move toward equitable discipline and foster positive school climate. Through the multi-tiered framework, PBIS provides support for all at the Tier 1 level, some at the Tier 2 level, and a few at the Tier 3 level. Tier 1 involves several core components or supports, which you see listed here on the right. Our learning intentions for this module are to understand the purpose of the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, or TFI, within the PBIS evaluation process. Also, we will learn the process for data collection that informs the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. Lastly, we will identify ways to share evaluation data with various stakeholder groups. Our Tier 1 professional learning roadmap guides us through the core features within Tier 1 support, with 1.8 always including the 8 classroom practices you see listed on the bottom right. In this module, we will focus on features 114 and 115, which involve assessing PBIS fidelity and annual evaluation. To do this, we will also focus more in depth on how this fidelity assessment will involve specific interviews as well as classroom observations to inform assessment for the 4 features you see indicated on the slide: 1.3, 1.4, 1.8, and 1.9, behavioral expectations, teaching expectations, classroom procedures, as well as feedback and acknowledgement. A system of evaluation serves several purposes. It can help to hold ourselves accountable to what we said we would do and what goals we established. It can also help us to celebrate our successes and share those with staff and other stakeholders. It also points us to areas within PBIS implementation that may need some adjusting. More than anything, evaluation helps us to step back and see the big picture and engage in collaborative reflection in order to make sense of all of the many details. Engaging in evaluation specifically enables us to effectively measure fidelity of PBIS implementation and whether we followed through on the actions we planned for during our last review of PBIS implementation. This chart here shows the value of not only reviewing our outcomes, which may, for example, be revealed in our behavioral data, but also reveals the value of measuring fidelity. When we have low fidelity or we aren't fully following through on our action plan and we aren't achieving our outcomes, such as improving behavior, interfering with learning in the classroom, we are losing ground. And the likelihood of failure is higher since we are not meeting goals, and we are also unsure of how it may have occurred. When we have high fidelity but low outcomes, we may have an understanding of how we got there, and we likely won't repeat those same mistakes. However, the outcomes are still undesirable. When we have positive outcomes but low fidelity, we will have a low understanding of how we achieved that success, and the chance that we will have that same success again is lower. You may have guessed that sustaining is where we want to spend our time. Here we achieve positive outcomes and we have a high understanding of how we achieve them. As a result, the likelihood that we will repeat that success is high. Let's take a closer look at the TFI feature, which corresponds with Fidelity 114. It reads, the Tier 1 team reviews and uses PBIS Fidelity using the TFI or Tiered Fidelity Inventory at least annually. Take a moment to read the corresponding rubric on the right. PBIS division coaches help to guide this process in Virginia Beach City Public Schools and work with teams to collect fidelity data sometime between January and March each school year. The full TFI document is available as a reference for you within this module. So why do we use the TFI? It is a tool that helps us to measure all three tiers of implementation. It can help to progress monitor our growth with PBIS, and it can provide a guide or roadmap for future actions as we grow implementation. You will notice a copy of the TFI is included as an attachment within this module. The TFI also helps teams to identify areas of strength or need. It is completed in partnership between the PBIS division coach and the school's PBIS team. And the target goal is to achieve at least 80% implementation. Before we close this session, we will outline how that percentage is calculated. Coaches will sometimes conduct an administrative interview with school admin to gather relevant information that will inform several TFI features. All but 3 of the TFI features are addressed in the PBIS TFI Administrator Survey. Coaches have previously sent this in Google form to school admin as well. PBIS coaches who are in attendance at monthly scheduled PBIS team meetings will likely already know much of this information. This document is available as well as a resource within this module. The interview and observation walkthrough tool is used to ask students and staff brief questions which will assess knowledge of the school-wide expectations, the teaching of those expectations, and the sharing of the acknowledgement system. Several staff will be asked, what are the 3 to 5 school-wide expectations? Have you taught those expectations and have you given an acknowledgement this year? Each school's expectations and specific acknowledgement system will determine the exact wording of those questions. Students will also be asked, what are your school's expectations? Or, for example, what are the 3 Rams Code expectations? They will also be asked, have you received, for example, a Be a Shark award or a LEAD sticker, or has your class received a Mustang sticker? This process works ideally when it is collaborative between the coach and team members. In this way, the process is quick and efficient, often being completed in less than 30 minutes. The goal during these brief interviews is also to target different staff and student demographics. This document is also made available within this module. Here are examples of what 3 or more expectations we may ask about when briefly interviewing students and staff. On the left is an example of Kempsville Meadows' 3 Cub Code school-wide expectations. And on the right, the 4 LEAD school-wide expectations at Salem High School. Here are several examples of acknowledgement systems within elementary, middle school, and high schools across our division. We may ask students, have you received a Dolphin Doing It Right ticket or a Lancetown Gotcha or Reps ticket? We may ask staff, have you given a Rockin' It ticket or have you given acknowledgement toward a class's Cougar Cash? We may also ask staff and students if they have given or received either a virtual or tangible version of their acknowledgement, as some schools have created different options for acknowledgement. Here you'll see an example of Tallwood High School's virtual acknowledgement ticket created by students, as well as a tangible version created in response to feedback from teachers. These brief interviews with staff and students will inform the scores given for the 3 TFI features listed here. For 1.3 behavior expectations, a 2 reads, 5 or fewer behavioral expectations exist that are positive, posted, and identified for specific settings within the matrix, and at least 90% of staff can list at least 67% of the expectations. For 1.4, teaching expectations, a 2 reads that a formal system with written schedules is used to teach expected behaviors directly to students across classroom and campus settings, and at least 70% of students can list at least 67% of the expectations. And for 1.9, feedback and acknowledgement, a 2 reads that a formal system for acknowledging student behavior is used by at least 90% of staff and received by at least 50% of students. These scores are determined as the coach or team member calculates how staff and students respond during the brief interviews. The classroom observation tool available within this module guides the determination of the TFI Feature 1.8 classroom procedures. This tool measures implementation of the 8 classroom practices. These have been shared in multiple ways within our school division. One is through the PBIS Google site, available using the class link button titled PBIS Virtual Resources. Let's take a look at the TFI Feature 1.8. It reads that Tier 1 features, which include school-wide expectations, routines, acknowledgement, that in-class continuum of consequences, are implemented within classrooms and consistent within school-wide systems. Take a moment to read the corresponding rubric. You will notice that a 2 corresponds to formal implementation of core Tier 1 features. The word formally refers to training having been provided to staff within the past 2 years on those core Tier 1 features: school-wide expectations, routines, acknowledgement, and in-class continuum of consequences. This is often reflected in a school's discipline flowchart as well. Coaches and/or PBIS team members use the observation tool reflected here on this slide to gather information on the 8 classroom practices during the 10 to 15-minute time period while we're in each classroom. The goal is to visit at least 6 classrooms across varying grade levels and subjects. Though the observation tool gathers information on all 8 practices, you will only need information from the first 4 areas to inform TFI Feature 1.8. Coaches and teams do, however, provide observational feedback on all 8 classroom practices during the next scheduled PBIS meeting in order to inform future staff support and professional learning. After all data is collected and compiled, the team, along with admin, will review each feature for agreement and determine the percentage fidelity score by dividing the total number of possible points, 30, by the total points given. At that time, the team chooses the features on which they want to focus for action planning. You will notice that this team chose to focus on features 1.8, 1.9, and 1.11. I'll give you a moment to read those action planning steps.
Next, we will focus on TFI Feature 1.15, Annual Evaluation. The Tier 1 team documents fidelity and effectiveness, including academic outcomes of Tier 1 practices at least annually, and this includes a year-by-year comparisons, and that's shared with stakeholders, which are staff, families, community, and the district, in a usable format. So the score of a 2 is evaluation is conducted at least annually, and outcomes, including academics, are shared with stakeholders with clear alterations in process based on evaluation. Schools are already pretty good at examining and sharing academic outcomes regularly to plan, teach, and assess academic progress. Schools measure this academic progress through the PCI goals. This feature 1.15 includes sharing fidelity practice annually, and by doing so, we measure progress over time and create plans for improvement. and these are then shared with stakeholders in a usable format. So implementation of a classroom procedure. This is an example of a year-by-year comparison, and 1.8 includes the classroom practices mentioned earlier in the presentation. In this sample action plan, the team decided to create a goal to increase the rate of reinforcement for positive behaviors and alignment of language to their school-wide expectations. You'll notice that action plan that Dayla talked about just a minute ago. And while observing in the classroom, data is collected for the ratio of behavior-specific acknowledgement to error correction, with the goal being 4.1. So this team decided that that's what they were going to focus on based on the outcome of this TFI Feature 1.8. And in the same action plan, the team also created a goal to increase the use of their school-wide acknowledgement system. You'll notice that a formal system and set of procedures for specific behaviors linked to the school-wide expectations and used across settings and within the classroom. And at least 90% of the staff have received at least 50 sample staff have received by at least 50% of sample students. And you'll notice that the score was a 1 because only 80% of staff interviewed had given acknowledgement, and only 45 of students had been or interviewed had received the acknowledgement. So they also decided to focus on that feature. And the last feature they decided that they wanted to work on was 1.11, student family community involvement. Stakeholders, students, families, and community members provide input on universal foundations, the expectations, consequences, acknowledgements, at least every 12 months. And you'll notice this team got a 1 for this feature. We do a pretty good job with sharing things with students, but we need to be better at family and community involvement. So here's an example of how one school shared the outcome data with students. And we did this in a student-friendly way. They shared the progress with PBIS student voice groups, and they gathered any relevant input on the goals. So they got student voice here. They also gave them an article, reviewed PBIS progress shared in the school newspaper, and student-led video sharing celebrations and growth areas identified during the TFI assessment. This is an example of a school-wide morning meeting. And also other examples include sharing through the school newspaper, and student groups can provide input on the goals with the team that the team creates. And here on this slide are examples of sharing fidelity data and action planning with relevant community members and families. Increase student and family community input on expectations, consequences, and acknowledgement systems by creating surveys. We can host family community conversations and invite local businesses, places of worship, and school volunteers to participate in the school-wide events and provide feedback on PBIS practices. One idea for sharing with families in the community is to create a quick one-pager that highlights areas of celebration, growth, and goals for next year. We also can share highlights with bus drivers, parks and rec, and school resource officers. So we want to get community involvement, anybody that comes into the building, the volunteers, the churches, the synagogues, any people who participate in the school's functioning to provide support. So you'll notice here, for this particular example, the overall implementation, this is the year-by-year comparison. So they've grown. And in the 2021 or 2020-2021 school year, they grow to 90% of implementation. That even though this school reached that, they still had features on which to focus in their goal setting and action planning. And this is how we share fidelity data with the school division. Each year, the TFI results from each cohort are shared with the division implementation team, docile, and senior staff. And this information is also available to the school board. This is a quote that pretty much goes with this webinar. Ask yourself if what you're doing today is getting you closer to where you want to be tomorrow. Data collection for fidelity of implementation helps us get closer to the outcomes that we desire. And thank you so much for participating in this webinar.